The subway platform security cameras captured everything that afternoon, and understood none of it. They recorded a man in a black suit sitting on a bench at the far end of the platform, still as stone while the city moved around him. They recorded a young woman pressed against a concrete pillar 20 meters away, shoulders hunched, arms locked around her backpack like it was the only solid thing left in her world. They recorded crowds, trains, the ordinary machinery of a city that never stopped moving. What the cameras didn't record was the moment everything changed. Yoon Sang-wook didn't believe in accidents. He believed in patterns, in the geometry of behavior, the mathematics of threat, the way a person's body told the truth their mouth was too afraid to speak. At 32, he had learned to read a room the way surgeons read a wound, quickly, cleanly, without the luxury of being wrong. The platform at Gangnam Station moved the way it always did. Office workers in identical suits. Students with headphones and blank faces. Tourists pulling luggage in the wrong direction. The controlled chaos of 8 million people living parallel lives in the same compressed space. Yoon moved through none of it. That was precisely the point. He'd been in Busan for 2 days. The kind of meetings that required physical presence, where the weight of a look across a table communicated more than any contract, where men needed to understand not just what he was offering but what declining would cost them. Now he was back in Seoul. Back in his city. Back where the architecture of his influence ran so deep into the foundations that even the people who hated him needed him. He was considering nothing in particular when he noticed her. Young. Foreign. Mid-20s, maybe younger, it was hard to tell beneath the exhaustion layered into her face like sediment. Dark hair pulled back in a rushed ponytail, strands escaping around cheeks that were bruised on the left side, a shadow of impact yellowing at the edge. She wore an oversized hoodie, beige, washed too many times, carrying the particular shapelessness of clothing kept past the point of comfort because there was nothing else. Her eyes moved constantly, left, right, left, back, not the wandering gaze of someone looking for a train, but the scanning pattern of someone who expected to be found. She was pressed against the pillar like she was trying to disappear into it. And she kept looking at him. Not the way people looked at strangers on a platform. Not the brief, involuntary eye contact of proximity. Something else, deliberate, returning, like a compass needle pulled back to the same point each time it drifted. His jaw tightened. He'd been surveilled by professionals. By police. By men with military training and decade-long grudges. He knew the shape of being watched. This wasn't that shape. But it was something. He stood. Adjusted his jacket. Began walking slowly toward the northern exit, his reflection tracking across the black window of a parked train. In the glass, he watched her. She shifted against the pillar. Her arms pulled the backpack tighter to her chest, one hand gripping the strap, knuckles white, the other pressed flat against the worn fabric of the bag itself. He stopped walking. Because that's when he saw it. Not her face. Not her bruise. Not the fear she was performing as stillness. The bag. The worn khaki surface. The dark letters written in someone's shaking hand, large enough to read from where he stood, deliberate enough that it wasn't accident, desperate enough that it broke something open in the cold architecture of his attention. 3 words. He's watching me. Yoon Sang-wook stood on that platform and understood, in the space of one breath, that the girl wasn't following him at all. She was hiding behind him. And somewhere on that platform, in the crowd his eyes had already dismissed as ordinary, someone was hunting her. Yoon Sang-wook had not always been the most dangerous person in every room he entered. There was a time, brief, distant, belonging to a version of himself he no longer recognized, when he was simply the most watchful. A boy from a narrow apartment in Mapo-gu who learned early that survival had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with attention. Who ate last so he could watch how others ate. Who walked behind so he could see what was ahead. Who learned, before he learned anything else, that the world rewarded the people who noticed things over the people who felt them. That boy had grown into this man. And this man had built something enormous from that single, early discipline. The Grand Hyatt Seoul sat above the city like a verdict. Marble floors that reflected everything. Ceilings high enough to make sound behave differently, conversation swallowed, footsteps absorbed, the whole lobby operating at a frequency of controlled, expensive quiet. Yoon's organization didn't own the building. It didn't need to. Ownership was for people who needed proof of power. Influence was quieter than that, and far more durable. The general manager greeted him by name but not too warmly. The concierge desk adjusted its attention subtly when he entered. The security staff, 3 of them visible, 2 more he'd placed himself in previous months, moved with the unconscious recalibration of people who understood the room had shifted. No one announced it. No one needed to. He crossed the lobby without hurrying. Dark suit, open collar, the watch on his left wrist catching light once and then disappearing back into stillness. He carried nothing. Men who needed briefcases were men who needed props. Yoon had learned to arrive at every room already holding everything he required, information, patience, and the specific quality of silence that made other people want to fill it. He chose a chair near the eastern pillar. Not the center of the room, never the center was for people who wanted to be seen. He wanted to see. The chair gave him sightlines to both entrance points, the elevator bank, the bar, and the corridor leading to the conference suites where, in 40 minutes, 3 men from a Busan logistics firm would arrive believing they were negotiating terms. They were not negotiating terms. They had already lost. They simply didn't know it yet, and Yoon saw no reason to tell them early. He settled into the chair and let the room come to him. Yoon saw rooms as information. The couple by the window, together by obligation, not choice, the way she stirred her coffee without drinking it, the way he checked his phone before she finished any sentence. The businessman at the bar nursing something amber at 2 in the afternoon, not a problem yet, but the particular looseness around his shoulders suggested it would be by evening. The concierge handling a complaint from a guest in a too loud voice, the complaint wasn't about the room. It was about something that had happened before the hotel, and the room was simply available. He read all of it the way other men read notifications. Automatically. Continuously. Without particular feeling. That was the part he never said aloud, the part that lived in the space between vigilance and its darker neighbor. There were nights, fewer now than before but still present, when he understood that what he'd built was not so different from a cage constructed entirely from the outside. Every entrance monitored. Every variable catalogued. Every person in every room reduced to their threat level and their utility. It kept him alive. It kept his people safe. It kept the machinery of everything he'd built moving with the kind of frictionless precision that looked, from the outside, like effortlessness. But there was a version of this, he knew it, had always known it, where vigilance without purpose curdled into something else entirely. Where watching everything became a way of connecting with nothing. Where the man who could read every room had quietly forgotten how to inhabit one. He was thinking about none of this consciously when the girl in the dirty hoodie walked through the door. He noticed her in the same breath he noticed everything else. Then he looked again. She was wrong for the room in every measurable way. That was the first thing Yoon registered, not her face, not her age, not the bruise yellowing along her left cheekbone. Just the wrongness. The Grand Hyatt lobby operated on an unspoken frequency of curated belonging, and this woman didn't carry a single note of it. The hoodie was oversized and worn past the point of comfort, a washed-out beige that had surrendered its original color sometime in a previous year. The skirt beneath it was muted, faded at the hem. Her shoes had the particular flatness of soles that had covered too much ground without replacement. She carried a backpack, old, khaki, the kind of bag that had been everywhere and arrived here last, pulled tight against her chest with both arms wrapped around it like she was guarding the only thing she had left. She moved slowly. Not the slowness of someone taking in an unfamiliar space, not the comfortable drift of a guest deciding between the bar and the elevator. This was a different kind of movement entirely, careful, controlled, each step placed with the specific deliberateness of someone who had learned that drawing attention carried consequences. Yoon's attention sharpened without moving a single visible muscle. His first read was professional. Someone placed here to watch him, a tail, possibly police, possibly a rival's investment in information. It wouldn't be the first time. Surveillance came in many registers, and he had learned over the years that the most effective version didn't look like surveillance at all. It looked like a distracted tourist. A woman waiting for a friend. Someone out of place in a way that explained itself before you thought to question it. The best watchers gave you a reason to look away. He didn't look away. Instead he catalogued her, the way he catalogued everything, methodically, without urgency, building the picture from its smallest components. Her eyes moved in a pattern he recognized, not the loose wandering of someone lost, but a scan. Systematic. Left side of the room, right side, back to center, then, and this was the detail that locked his attention, back to him. She returned to him the way a compass needle returns to north. Not once. Not twice. Continuously, with the rhythm of something she couldn't entirely control. He shifted almost imperceptibly in his chair. She adjusted her position by the entrance, putting a pillar partially between them. He noted it. A counter move, however unconscious, the kind of spatial awareness that suggested either training or long practice. His assessment hardened. Amateur, perhaps, but not random. Someone had put her here for a reason. He began to build the case against her the way he built every case, from evidence outward, not from conclusion backward. The backpack held against her chest rather than worn normally, she was protecting something inside it, or using it as a barrier, or both. The constant peripheral scanning, she was monitoring multiple points simultaneously, which meant she expected something to happen and wanted to see it coming. The deliberate positioning near exits, she was maintaining escape routes. The return to his location every few seconds, he was her reference point. All of it, read the way he had trained himself to read for 15 years, pointed in one direction. What he didn't ask, what his training had never required him to ask, because it had never been the relevant question, was who she was afraid of. His entire architecture of attention had been built around a single axis, threat to him, or not a threat to him. Dangerous, or irrelevant. Watching, or passing through. The system was precise. The system had kept him alive through situations that had ended other men. The system had no category for a young woman who was scanning a room not because she was hunting but because she was hunted. So he didn't see it. Not yet. He saw the scanning and read it as surveillance. He saw the positioning and read it as tactical. He saw the way she kept returning her gaze to him and read it as confirmation. Every accurate observation fed the wrong conclusion, because the framework doing the interpreting had only ever been pointed in one direction. He was looking for danger aimed at himself. The idea that danger could be aimed at someone else, that this woman could be the center of the threat rather than its instrument, existed outside the diagram entirely. He reached for his phone. One message to the man stationed near the bar, 2 words, East Entrance, and she would be quietly removed before the Busan men arrived. Efficient. Invisible. Correct, by every measure his world had ever given him. His thumb hovered over the screen. And then she shifted her weight, and the backpack turned, and the lobby light fell across the fabric at a different angle. And he read the words written there in someone's shaking hand. And the diagram he'd been working from collapsed entirely. 3 words. That was all it took to dismantle 15 years of certainty in the space of a single breath. He's watching me. Yoon didn't move. That was the discipline, the thing that separated men who survived from men who merely reacted. He sat with the information the way he had learned to sit with all difficult information, completely still, giving nothing to the room, letting the new truth settle into the existing architecture of everything he thought he understood about the last 4 minutes. The phone remained in his hand. His thumb remained where it was. The message to the man at the bar remained unsent. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. He read the words again. Not because he'd misread them, his vision was precise, and the letters were large enough, dark enough, written with the particular pressure of someone who needed to be seen, but because reading them a second time changed what they meant. The first time was recognition. The second time was understanding. She hadn't written those words for him. She hadn't written them for anyone specific. She had written them the way a person writes something when there is no one left to tell, not a message directed outward, but a fact pressed into the only surface available, a private scream made permanent on worn khaki fabric because silence had become unbearable and there was nothing else left to do with the truth. He put the phone away without sending anything. And then he started over. Everything he had built about her in the previous 4 minutes, dismantled, cleared, set aside without sentiment. This was the other discipline, the one that lived underneath the first, the ability to be wrong without defending the wrongness. Most men, when their assessment failed, spent energy protecting the original conclusion. Yoon had learned early that this was how people died. The world didn't reward consistency. It rewarded accuracy. And accuracy sometimes required burning down everything you just constructed and beginning again from the ground. He looked at her differently now. Same woman, same room, same details, but the framework doing the interpreting had shifted, and so the details rearranged themselves into an entirely different picture. The scanning wasn't surveillance. It was the constant environmental monitoring of someone who expected to be approached from any direction without warning. The positioning near the pillar wasn't tactical in the professional sense, it was the instinctive geometry of a person who had learned that walls at your back and sightlines ahead were the difference between a bad moment and a worse one. The way she kept returning her gaze to him, that wasn't target fixation. That was something older and more desperate than tradecraft. That was a person in a frightening room who had identified, without quite knowing why, that the most dangerous presence available was also, paradoxically, the safest place to stand near. Because predators, in his experience, rarely hunted in each other's shadow. She hadn't been watching him. She had been using him. The bruise on her cheek caught the lobby light as she shifted her weight again. He looked at it properly this time, without the distorting lens of his first assumption. Recent. The particular yellowing at the edges that meant 3 or 4 days old, not fresh enough to be last night, not faded enough to be last week. Her arms were still locked around the backpack, but he understood now what she was protecting. Not a device, not a file, not anything that belonged to his world. Just the message on the back. Just the 3 words she'd written in the only medium available to her, on the only thing she carried everywhere, because somewhere in the calculus of her desperation she had decided that making the truth visible, even if no one looked, even if no one understood, was better than carrying it in total silence. He thought about that. About what it cost to write something like that and then walk into a room full of strangers wearing it on your back. The courage of it, or the exhaustion that looks like courage when hope has been reduced to its smallest possible form. Somewhere in this lobby, or close to it, someone was watching her. The message said so. Her body said so. The way she flinched at movement in her peripheral vision and then controlled the flinch, smoothed it back into stillness with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that visible fear invited more of what caused it, all of it said so. He had almost sent the message. 2 words, East Entrance, and she would have been walked out of the building and back into whatever she was running from, by the hand of the man she'd positioned herself near because she thought proximity to danger might keep the other danger at a distance. He had almost done that. The understanding of it sat in his chest like pressure. He stood from the chair, unhurried, and began moving toward her. He didn't walk toward her directly. That was important. A man like him, moving with purpose across a lobby toward a frightened woman, would register as exactly the kind of threat she was already braced against. So he angled away first, toward the concierge desk, unhurried, as though he had a question about nothing in particular. He spoke briefly to the woman behind the counter, words that didn't matter, giving Angela time to track his movement and find it unthreatening. Then he drifted, naturally, the way water finds its level, until he was close enough to speak without raising his voice. He stopped beside the pillar. Not in front of her. Beside her, leaving her the open side, leaving her the exit. Every detail of his positioning designed to communicate the same thing: you can leave. I am not blocking you. This is a choice. He looked straight ahead when he spoke. There's a private lounge on the second floor, he said, in English, quietly. No cameras. No staff unless I request them. You can leave whenever you want. I won't follow you. A pause. He felt her stillness beside him, the particular quality of stillness that wasn't calm but its opposite, a person holding every muscle in suspension, waiting to understand what kind of danger this was. I read what's on your bag, he said. Another pause. Longer. I'm not him, Yoon said. He waited. He was good at waiting. It was perhaps the thing he did best, the capacity to hold space without filling it, to let silence do the work that pressure never could. Most people, in his experience, couldn't tolerate silence for more than a few seconds. They rushed to fill it, and in the rushing they revealed everything. Angela Palmer said nothing for a long time. Then, quietly, how do I know that? It wasn't a question. It was the sound of someone who had stopped expecting answers and was simply thinking aloud. You don't, Yoon said. But you wrote those words on your bag and walked into a public place with them. Which means some part of you is still looking for someone to see them. The silence this time was different. Shorter. Second floor, she said. The lounge was small, neutral, the kind of room designed to feel like nothing: cream walls, 2 chairs, a low table, a window overlooking a courtyard that held no interest for anyone. Yoon had used it for conversations that couldn't happen in rooms with more ears. It served the same purpose now, though for entirely different reasons. Angela sat on the edge of her chair. Backpack in her lap, arms still around it, as though she hadn't yet decided whether she was staying. She looked at him the way people looked at things they hadn't fully committed to trusting, with a wariness that was almost scientific, measuring, recalibrating every few seconds. He didn't push. He asked one question and then left it in the room between them. How long? She looked at her hands. 6 weeks. And then, in pieces, the way someone tells a story they've told before but never been believed, parceling it out carefully, watching for the moment the listener's expression shifts from attention to skepticism, she told him. His name was Marcus Hale. She'd met him 3 months ago through a professional network, a British expat with a consultancy and an easy smile and the particular social fluency of a man who had spent years learning exactly how to appear trustworthy to exactly the kind of person Angela was. She was in Seoul on a humanitarian work visa, midway through an 18-month placement, living in a serviced apartment that cost more than her stipend covered comfortably. He had offered to help with housing contacts. Then with visa paperwork that confused her. Then with a bank account issue that his connection at a financial firm could resolve faster than the standard process. Each piece of help had arrived at exactly the right moment. That was the thing she kept returning to, the timing of it. How every offer had appeared precisely when she was most overwhelmed, most isolated, most grateful for the presence of someone who seemed to understand the particular exhaustion of being foreign and alone and trying to do difficult work in a country whose systems she was still learning to navigate. She hadn't seen it being constructed around her. That was the point. That was always the point. By the time she understood what the structure was, she was inside it. He had the login credentials to the email account she used for work correspondence, offered helpfully during a period when her phone was broken and she'd needed to send something urgently. He had become the primary contact for her landlord, handling communications she'd found bureaucratically difficult. He knew her schedule with the precision of someone who had assembled it piece by piece over weeks, each piece offered willingly because each piece, in isolation, had seemed like nothing. "I tried to go to the police," Angela said. Her voice was flat now, the flatness of someone describing a wound they've stopped expecting to heal. "Twice. The first officer told me it sounded like a misunderstanding. The second one asked if I had documentation." She paused. "Marcus knew I'd gone. Both times. Before I got back to my apartment." She looked up then, directly at Yoon, and what was in her eyes wasn't fear exactly, it was the specific exhaustion of someone who has run the calculations repeatedly and kept arriving at the same answer. "I don't know who he knows. I don't know how far it goes. I just know that every time I've tried to tell someone, he's already been there first." Yoon said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about the architecture of it, the careful, patient construction of a situation where the victim had no credible witness because the predator had ensured that every system she might turn to had already received a version of events that made her seem unstable, confused, difficult. It wasn't violence. It wasn't crude. It was something that required intelligence and planning and a profound contempt for the person being dismantled. "The message on the bag," Yoon said. "How long have you been carrying it like that?" Angela looked down at the backpack. "For days," she said quietly. "I wrote it because," she stopped. "Started again. I needed someone to know. Even if no one looked. Even if nothing happened." She exhaled slowly. "I needed it to exist somewhere outside my own head." Yoon looked at her for a long moment. A woman who had been systematically erased from every system designed to protect her, sitting in a room she had no reason to trust, telling her story to a man she had no reason to believe, because the alternative was carrying it alone until it became too heavy to carry at all. "I believe you," he said. It was, he understood from the way her breath changed, possibly the first time anyone had said that to her in 6 weeks. He didn't tell Angela any of this. It wasn't her burden to carry, and he wasn't a man who explained himself. But sitting in that quiet room, listening to the particular flatness in her voice, the sound of someone who had repeated the truth so many times to people who didn't believe it that the truth itself had started to feel like something she was no longer sure of, he felt the past move through him the way cold air moves through a room when a window opens somewhere distant. Invisible. Unmistakable. Her name was Yoon Ji-soo. His sister. 4 years younger, which had always felt like 4 years he was supposed to use as a shield between her and everything that moved too fast and hit too hard in the world they'd grown up in. She had their mother's patience and their father's stubbornness and a laugh that arrived before the thing that caused it, anticipating joy the way other people anticipated danger. He had loved her in the way that older siblings love the younger ones they've half-raised, not softly, not with words, but with the constancy of someone who had appointed themselves a wall and intended to stay one. He had been 19 when he first noticed something wrong. The boyfriend's name was Choi Dae-young. 24, employed at a packaging firm, the kind of man who occupied space with a particular ease that looked like confidence until you understood it was simply the comfort of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He smiled at the right moments. He spoke to parents with the right register of respect. He was, in every visible way, exactly what a young woman's family hoped she would bring home. Yoon had watched him the way he watched everything, quietly, from the edges, cataloging. He saw things. The way Dae-young's hand on Ji-soo's arm shifted from affectionate to directive in the space of a single second when she said something he hadn't anticipated. The way she checked his expression before answering questions that had nothing to do with him. The way she laughed less, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, the laugh that arrived before the joy appearing less frequently, then rarely, then not at all, replaced by a careful, measured smile that gave nothing away. Yoon had said something once. To his mother. Careful words, chosen deliberately, because he understood even then that accusation without evidence was just noise, and noise made people defensive rather than alert. His mother had listened and then told him that Ji-soo seemed happy, that Dae-young was a good provider, that Yoon worried too much and saw problems where there were none because that was simply how he was built. He had let it go. That was the fact he had never fully forgiven himself for, not the seeing, which he had done, but the letting go. The moment when the friction of being disbelieved became heavier than the cost of staying silent, and he had chosen the path that required less of him. He was 19. He had no money, no leverage, no language for what he was observing that would survive contact with a world that wanted reassurance over truth. He told himself he would watch more carefully. That he would be ready to act when there was something more concrete to act on. Ji-soo was gone before concrete arrived. Not dead, he needed to be precise about that, even in memory, because the imprecision had cost him years of misplaced grief before he corrected it. Gone in the way that people disappeared when someone had spent long enough convincing them that the world outside a particular relationship was hostile and unnavigable and that they were too damaged to survive it alone. Dae-young had moved her to Taejun, then further, methodically increasing the distance between her and every person who might have given her a different accounting of herself. By the time Yoon had the resources to find her, 3 years later, by which point he was no longer the powerless 19-year-old who could be dismissed by a mother who wanted peace over truth, she was someone he recognized only in outline. The shape of her was the same. Everything that had moved inside the shape had been reorganized by someone else's hands. She was alive. She was, by her own accounting, fine. He had learned to live with the distance. He had not learned to live with the moment he chose silence over friction when he was 19 and she still had the laugh that arrived before the joy. That was what sat in his chest now, in this quiet room in the Grand Hyatt, listening to Angela Palmer describe a system built to make her unbelievable. Not sentiment. Not pity. Something harder and more durable than either. The absolute, cellular certainty that he was not going to choose the easier thing again. That whatever this cost, in time, in complexity, in the disruption of the clean, controlled world he had constructed around himself, he was going to pay it. He had spent 15 years building power. He had told himself it was for protection. For his people. For the empire that answered to him. But power that only ever served itself was just a longer word for cowardice. And he had been 19 once. He was not 19 anymore. He made 2 calls from the lounge while Angela sat across from him. The calls were brief, specific, and delivered in the clipped register he used when speed mattered more than explanation. The first was to a man named Park Sung-jin, who ran the information side of Yoon's operation from a floor of a building in Uedo that appeared, on paper, to belong to a mid-sized consulting firm. The second was to a woman named Kang Mira, a lawyer who operated in the precise territory between legitimate practice and the kind of work that required discretion rather than documentation. Both calls lasted under 90 seconds. Both ended with the same instruction, everything available, 2 hours. He put the phone away and looked at Angela. "You'll stay here until I know more," he said. Not a question, but not a command either, something in between, offered in the tone of a man stating what made sense rather than what he required. "There's food if you need it. Water. You don't have to speak to anyone." Angela looked at him for a moment with that measuring quality he was becoming familiar with, the constant, low-level assessment of someone who had learned that comfort offered quickly was usually comfort offered strategically. Then she nodded, once, and looked at the window. He left her there and went to work. Park Sung-jin called back in 94 minutes. Yoon was in a different room by then. The meeting with the Busan men concluded and dispatched. They had made the smart choice, as people generally did when the alternative was made sufficiently clear, and he listened to Sung-jin's report with the phone pressed to his ear and nothing in his expression that would have told a stranger anything at all. Marcus Hale. 44. Born in Guildford, educated at Bristol, employed for 11 years by a financial consultancy with regional offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Seoul. Clean record in the United Kingdom. Clean record in Singapore. 2 complaints filed in Hong Kong, one by a former colleague, one by a woman whose name appeared in no subsequent documentation, both resolved without formal proceeding, and both, Sung-jin noted with the dry precision of someone who had seen this particular pattern before, resolved in the same quarter that Hale's firm had renewed a significant contract with a municipal body whose senior procurement officer played golf with Hale's regional director. In Seoul, he had been present for 3 years. He held a long-term business visa with 2 renewals, and his consultancy had a client relationship with a trade facilitation body that operated under loose affiliation with the British Embassy's commercial division. Not diplomatic immunity, Sung-jin was careful about this distinction, because it mattered, but diplomatic adjacency. The kind of professional proximity that made local authorities instinctively cautious about generating paperwork that might require inter-agency conversation. Not impossible to move against. Simply expensive, in the currency of institutional friction. There were 2 other women. Sung-jin had found them in the sediment of deleted accounts, closed cases, and the particular digital archaeology of someone who knew where to look when official records had been deliberately thinned. A Filipina nurse who had filed a harassment complaint 18 months ago that had been reclassified as a civil matter and subsequently abandoned. A Korean-American graduate student who had left Seoul abruptly 14 months ago, mid-semester, and whose university counselor's notes, obtained through a channel Yoon did not ask Sung-jin to specify, referenced ongoing fear of a named individual whose name had been redacted but whose description matched Hale with the specificity of someone trying to be careful rather than inaccurate. Neither woman had been believed quickly enough to matter. Both had eventually stopped trying. Kang Myra's assessment arrived by secure message 20 minutes after Sung-jin's call. She had reviewed Angela's visa situation, the email account access, the landlord communication channel, and the pattern of police contact. Her conclusion was precise and without decoration: direct official complaint, filed today, without corroboration, had a poor probability of generating protective action before Hale could generate a counter-narrative. The system was not corrupt. It was simply slow, and slowness, in this specific configuration, functioned identically to obstruction. What was needed was documentation so complete that skepticism became untenable. Corroboration that transformed a single foreign woman's account into a pattern. And pressure applied at the exact point where Hale's diplomatic adjacency became a liability to the people providing it rather than a shield. Yoon read the message twice. Then he wrote back 3 words: build the file. He stood, walked back toward the lounge, and understood with the clean certainty of someone who had dismantled complicated structures before that Marcus Hale had made the foundational error of men who relied on systems to protect them. He had never considered what happened when someone who didn't work within those systems decided to dismantle them from the outside. He was about to find out. Marcus Hale arrived at the hotel at 7:14 in the evening believing he had been invited. That was Kang Myra's particular skill, the ability to construct an invitation that felt like opportunity. The message she'd sent through his consultancy's official inquiry channel had referenced a potential client, a Seoul-based holdings group exploring British financial partnerships, the kind of introductory meeting that men like Hale accepted reflexively because the pipeline of such meetings was the architecture of their professional identity. He had confirmed within 20 minutes. He had arrived 8 minutes early, which told Yoon something about his hunger beneath the confidence, the way certain kinds of ambition revealed themselves in punctuality. Sung-jin's man at the entrance described him before he reached the room: navy blazer, open collar, the easy gait of someone accustomed to walking into unfamiliar spaces and immediately recalibrating them around himself. 44 years old and comfortable in every visible centimeter of it. Yoon was already seated when Hale entered. Same chair he'd occupied that morning, same quality of stillness, same absence of anything in his expression that would give a newcomer useful information. The room was the same private lounge, cream walls, low table, the courtyard window holding the dark blue of early evening. Kang Myra sat to one side, a closed folder on the table in front of her, her posture the precise neutrality of someone who had attended many difficult conversations and found none of them surprising. Hale's eyes moved across the room in the practiced sweep of someone performing casualness. They landed on Yoon, registered the suit, the watch, the quality of stillness, and made an immediate upward adjustment in their assessment. He smiled, the good smile, Yoon noted, the one that arrived in the eyes first and suggested warmth rather than merely performing it. "Mr. Yoon," Hale said, extending his hand. "Marcus Hale. Pleasure." Yoon looked at the hand for 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then he gestured to the chair opposite without taking it. Hale sat. The smile recalibrated slightly, still present, but working harder now. "I understand you're exploring some partnership opportunities," Hale began, reaching for the register of professional fluency he'd spent decades perfecting. "I have to say, the timing is..." "Angela Palmer," Yoon said. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Hale's expression didn't collapse, he was too practiced for collapse, but something behind it shifted, a barely perceptible reorganization, the internal machinery adjusting to an unexpected variable. "I'm sorry," Hale said. Yoon nodded to Kong Mira. She opened the folder and slid it across the table. Hale looked down at it with the controlled deliberateness of someone deciding how to react before they'd finished processing what they were reacting to. What he saw was a document 43 pages long. Angela's account, transcribed and annotated. The email access logs. The landlord communications. The police reports, both of them, with timestamps. Sung Jin's file on the Hong Kong complaints. The graduate student's counselor notes. The Filipina nurse's abandoned case number, cross-referenced with Hale's residential address at the time. A pattern, documented with the thoroughness of people who understood that the difference between a story and evidence was specificity. Hale looked up. The smile was gone. In its place was something more honest, the expression of a man recalculating, rapidly, what his available options were. "This is," he started. "Accurate," Yoon said. "All of it." A silence. Hale looked at the folder again, then at Kong Mira, then at Yoon, his eyes moving with the speed of someone running scenarios. Yoon recognized the process. He'd watched men do it across tables many times, the rapid internal auditing of leverage, exposure, and exit. "I have professional relationships with." "I know who you have relationships with," Yoon said. His voice hadn't changed in register or temperature since Hale had entered the room. That steadiness, he had learned, was more unsettling than any escalation. "I know which officer at the commercial division signs your visa renewal correspondence. I know which procurement contact in Hong Kong was present at both complaint resolutions. I know the name of your regional director and the golf club where he met the municipal officer." He paused. "I know all of it, Mr. Hale, which means your relationships are not protection. They are exposure. For everyone involved." Hale said nothing. The confidence had not disappeared entirely, it was structural, too deeply built to simply vacate, but it had become effortful in a way it hadn't been 60 seconds ago. Yoon leaned forward slightly. "Here is what happens next. Angela Palmer receives her documents, her accounts, and her landlord correspondence. You will communicate to your contact at the visa office that her renewal requires no further complication. You will have no further contact with her, with anyone she knows, or with anyone in a situation resembling hers." He let that sit. "And the file?" Hale asked quietly. "Remains with me," Yoon said. "As long as you give me no reason to use it." Hale looked at the folder one final time. Then he nodded, not the easy, performed nod of a man agreeing to something convenient, but the smaller, tighter nod of a man accepting something he cannot refuse. That, Yoon thought, was the only kind of agreement worth having. Kong Mira brought the documents at 9:15. She set them on the low table in front of Angela without ceremony, a passport, a national identification card, a folded sheet containing the login credentials to the email account Marcus had accessed, and a printed confirmation from the visa office that her renewal application had been flagged for expedited processing under a standard administrative correction. Legitimate paperwork, moving through legitimate channels, accelerated by pressure applied at exactly the right point by someone who understood where the pressure needed to go. Angela looked at the documents for a long moment without touching them. Then she reached out and picked up the passport, held it in both hands, and said nothing. Yoon watched her read her own name on the cover the way people read things they had begun to doubt were still true. He waited until she set it down. "There's a residence," he said. "Serviced apartment, Mapo-gu, lease paid for 6 months. It's registered under a name that has no connection to you or to anything Marcus Hale could locate through his existing channels. The building has security. The property manager has been briefed, not on the specifics, only on what to watch for and who to call if anything seems wrong." He paused. "You can stay as long as you need. You can leave whenever you decide you're ready." Angela looked at him. "Why Mapo-gu?" It was a precise question, and he respected it for that. She wasn't asking out of suspicion exactly, she was asking because she had learned, over the past 6 weeks, to look for the logic underneath generosity, to understand the structure of an offer before she accepted it. "It's where I grew up," Yoon said. "I know the streets. I know the people who matter in that neighborhood." He held her gaze. "It's not sentiment. It's practicality." She accepted that with a small nod. "There's also this." He slid a second folder across the table. Thinner than the one Kong Mira had shown Hale, but its weight was different, not the weight of exposure but of possibility. Inside was a contact at the Korea Legal Aid Corporation, a specialist in cases involving foreign nationals and coercive control. A case number already opened, preliminary documentation already filed, Angela's account already transcribed and time-stamped. Sung Jin's research into the other 2 women, the nurse, the graduate student, summarized in a format that a legal advocate could work with. The beginning of something official, built with the materials of everything that had happened. Angela looked through it slowly. He let her. "He'll know the file exists," Yoon said. "He already knows that. What he won't know is how much of it has already moved beyond my hands." He let that settle. The legal advocate's name is Sun Ji-hyun. She has handled 12 cases with this profile in the past 4 years. 8 of them resulted in formal proceedings. She is not easy to discourage and she has no professional relationship with anyone in Marcus Hale's network. He paused. "She is also, I should tell you, entirely independent of me. Once you walk into her office, what happens next belongs to you. Not to me." Angela looked up at that. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, but the particular attention of someone encountering an offer they hadn't expected the shape of. "I'm not telling you this for your sake," Yoon said. "It was important to be precise. Marcus Hale has done this before. He will do it again. The file I hold keeps him careful around you, it doesn't make him incapable of finding someone else in a similar position. The only thing that changes that is official documentation, official proceedings, and the kind of public record that makes his professional adjacencies too expensive to maintain." He looked at her steadily. "You are the person with standing to file that. I am not." Angela was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the city had settled into its nighttime register, lights rather than movement, the distant sound of traffic thinned to something almost ambient. "You're saying you need me to do this," she said. "I'm saying the other women need someone to do it," Yoon said. "You are in a position to be that person. That is not an obligation. It is simply true." She looked at the folder again. At the passport beside it. At the contact sheet and the case number and the name of a lawyer who owed nothing to anyone who had hurt her. Then she closed the folder carefully, the way people close things they intend to open again, and held it against her chest alongside the backpack that still sat in her lap. "Okay," Angela said. "Not thank you. Not yet. Just okay," the word of someone who had made a decision, which was, Yoon understood, worth considerably more. The message arrived on a Tuesday in late March, forwarded through Kong Myra's office with a single line of accompaniment. She asked that this reach you. Yoon was at his desk when he read it. The office occupied the upper floor of a building in Yonggu that held, below it, 3 legitimate businesses and the administrative core of everything that wasn't. The window behind him faced north, toward the Han River, which on clear days appeared as a flat silver line dividing the city from its reflection. It was a clear day. He hadn't looked at the river once. There was a land acquisition in Incheon requiring his attention, 2 personnel matters that Sung Jin had flagged as time-sensitive, and a call scheduled for the afternoon with a man in Tokyo whose cooperation was necessary and whose trust was not yet complete. He read the message anyway. From the beginning, without skimming, the way he read things that mattered. Angela had written it in the careful, precise English of someone who had composed it more than once before sending, not stiff, but considered, each sentence carrying the weight of having been chosen over other sentences. She wrote that the case against Marcus Hale had been formally accepted by the Seoul Western District Prosecutor's Office 4 weeks ago. That Sun Ji-hyun had filed on behalf of 3 complainants, Angela, and both of the women Sung Jin's research had surfaced, the nurse and the graduate student, both of whom had agreed to add their accounts once Angela's documentation made the pattern undeniable. That Hale's diplomatic adjacency had not survived contact with a file that named, specifically and with supporting evidence, the professional relationships he had relied upon, several of which had quietly withdrawn their association once it became clear that proximity to him carried costs they hadn't anticipated. She wrote that his visa renewal had been denied. She wrote that she was still in Seoul. Still working, her placement extended by 6 months at her organization's request. That she had moved into her own apartment, her own name on the lease, her own account at her own bank, her own phone with her own credentials and nobody else's access. That Sun Ji-hyun had become something adjacent to a friend, which she hadn't expected and was still getting used to, the way she was still getting used to several things that had previously felt unavailable to her. Near the end, she wrote about the backpack. I still have it. I don't carry it anymore, I have a new one, plain blue, nothing written on it. But I kept the old one because I think I needed to keep the evidence of that version of myself. The person who was desperate enough to write on her own bag and walk into a room full of strangers wearing it. I used to be ashamed of that. I'm not anymore. I was doing the only thing I could think of. I was trying to be seen. I used to write on it because I needed someone to see. I don't need to write on things anymore. I have a voice now. I don't know if you think about that afternoon. I don't know if it was significant to you in the way it was significant to me. You seem like someone for whom significant things happen regularly, and perhaps this was ordinary by your measure. But I want you to know that it wasn't ordinary. And I want you to know that what you did, which was simply to look, and then to act on what you saw, is something I carry with me in a way that is useful rather than heavy. Thank you for seeing me. I hope someone sees you too, when you need it. The message ended there. No name at the bottom. She had signed it, simply, Angela. Yoon read it once. Then he set it down on the desk and looked at it for a moment without picking it up again. Outside, the Han River held its silver line against the March sky. One of the legitimate businesses on the floor below was having a staff meeting. He could hear the muffled rhythm of it through the ceiling, words indistinct, the sound of ordinary work being done by people who would go home tonight to lives that had nothing to do with his. He folded the message along its existing creases. Opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one that locked, the one that held things rather than documents, and placed it inside. Closed the drawer. Locked it. Then he pulled the Incheon file toward him and went back to work. The room was the same. The desk, the window, the river, the work. Everything in its place, everything as it had been before he read the message. But there was something different in the quality of the silence. Lighter, somehow. As though something that had been held at a particular tension for a very long time had been, quietly and without announcement, released. He didn't examine it. He wasn't built for that kind of examination. But he didn't push it away either, just let it remain, the way you leave a window open when the air outside has finally changed, not making anything of it, simply allowing the difference in. Somewhere in Seoul, a young woman with a plain blue backpack was building a life that belonged entirely to herself. He had not built it for her. He had only cleared enough of the wreckage that she could see the ground beneath it. What she constructed on that ground was hers, the voice, the case, the lease in her own name, the friendship she hadn't expected, the version of herself she was still getting used to. All of it, hers. That was the point. That had always been the point. The most dangerous thing about people in pain was how easy they were to ignore, how conveniently they could be reduced to background, to noise, to a woman in a dirty hoodie who didn't belong in a lobby and could be removed with 2 words and a text message. How the systems designed to help them had learned, through long practice, to look slightly to the side. He had looked directly. That was all. He had looked, and then he had refused to look away, and then he had used everything available to him in service of something that returned nothing to his empire, nothing to his ledger, nothing to the infrastructure of power he spent every other day maintaining and expanding. It had cost him an afternoon, 2 days of Sung Jin's attention, Kong Myra's considerable skill, and a 6-month lease in Mapo-gu. He was not a good man. He understood this without distress, it was simply accurate, the way many things were simply accurate. The work he did and the methods he used and the world he operated in did not produce good men. They produced effective ones, occasionally precise ones, rarely wise ones. But on one Tuesday afternoon in a Seoul hotel lobby, he had chosen to see something he could have chosen to ignore. And a woman who had ridden her fear on the only surface available to her, and carried it into a room full of strangers hoping that someone might look, had been seen. He found, returning to the Incheon file, that this was enough. Not redemption. He wasn't interested in redemption, it was a transaction that required a cleaner ledger than his would ever be. Just enough. A small recalibration in a world that tilted, reliably and without apology, toward the convenience of looking away. Outside, the Han River held its line. He worked until dark, and then a little longer, and the lightness in the room remained.